I've always had a goal to hit 1,000 likes on a video, but you legends smashed past that and got one of my videos to over 2K likes. Let's break even more records on this video. Please smash that like button. And I want to try this one thing. I want to know who my devoted listeners are. So once you've done that, comment down below that you hit that like button hard, or even a kind message. Let's see who our loyal devoted viewers are. You know who you are. Once again, thank you guys so much. Now to these amazing stories. There's bad timing, and then there's whatever the hell Jamie was doing. We met on a random Tuesday, which already set the tone. It wasn't a weekend, let's get dressed up and try to impress each other vibe. It was more like, hey, I'm bored and mildly optimistic. He picked this cozy Thai place downtown. Not fancy, not sketchy, kind of in between. I like that. It made me feel like this might actually be a chill, no pressure kind of evening. Spoiler, it wasn't. Jimmy showed up looking very average in that probably owns boat shoes, but doesn't have a boat kind of way. His hair was a little too perfect, and his cologne was like trying a bit too hard to say, I'm a man of taste, but failing. Still, I gave him points for being punctual and holding the door. We did the whole awkward, you look like your photos exchange and sat down. At first, it was fine. We talked about our jobs. He said he worked in finance, which usually means I make spreadsheets and complain about them a lot. I gave him the rundown on mine, and he nodded along like he was paying attention, even though his eyes glazed over when I mentioned anything that wasn't about him. He asked if I liked traveling. I was halfway through a story about getting stuck in an airport overnight when he started checking the specials menu like he was trying to memorize it. We ordered. He got a green curry. I got pad CU. I was low-key excited about the food more than the company. We made small talk, music, family, favorite movies. He seemed decent, maybe a little bland, but not unbearable. Definitely not someone who screams emotional bomb out to explode. But I was wrong, so wrong. Midway through dinner, just as I was pouring more Thai iced tea, he drops it, completely casually like he's commenting on the weather. He says, so I still live with my ex-fiancée. Well, technically we're on a break. She thinks we're working things out, but I needed to get out while she's visiting her parents. I froze with my drink halfway to my mouth. I legit thought he was kidding. Like, maybe this was some weird joke he thought would land. But no. He went right back to eating like he hadn't just lit the entire dinner on fire. He explained that her name was Marissa. They'd been together for 4 years, and they were supposed to get married last fall, but things got complicated. According to him, she got clingy. He got distant, and instead of breaking up properly, they just paused. Except she didn't know it was a pause. She thought they were still in the working on things phase. And this date? Yeah, this was him testing the waters. He even said it like that, like it was a science experiment. I stared at him for a second trying to figure out if I was on a hidden camera show. He was just sitting there chewing calmly like everything he just said was the most reasonable thing in the world. He told me she was in Arizona visiting her mom and wouldn't be back until Thursday, which is why he figured he could squeeze in a date or two without it being a big deal. He said that last part while smiling, like he expected me to nod and say, yeah, totally, great plan. He kept talking. He said they still share a lease, that she still does his laundry, that they still walk the dog together. He even said she sleeps in the bed, sometimes depending on the night, but not in a romantic way according to him, just old habits. He acted like this was some quirky sitcom setup, not a whole mess of emotional confusion he dragged me into without warning. And get this, he actually tried to spin it like a compliment. He told me he chose me for this test run because I seemed level-headed, like I should feel honored to be his rebound science fair project. I was just blinking at him like, sir, are you okay? I didn't even finish my noodles. I made up some excuse about an early meeting and started collecting my stuff. He looked a little confused, like he genuinely thought this was going well. As if my fiancé thinks we're still engaged, but I disagree is a normal first date confession. He offered to pay, which I let him do because, honestly, that was the least he could contribute to the disaster. As I got up to leave, he asked if I'd be down to do this again sometime. Said I had a good vibe. I smiled, gave the fake maybe, and bolted the second I hit the sidewalk. I got in my car and just sat there for a minute. Not mad, just stunned. Like when your phone dies at 20% and you weren't expecting it. I texted my best friend everything, and her response was just, "Men are wild," which honestly fair. I don't even know what lesson I was supposed to learn here. Don't date men who wear too much cologne. Avoid Tuesday dates. If a guy says his past relationship is complicated, assume it's actively happening. Either way, Jamie is back in whatever emotional triangle he created, and off eating pads. See you in peace at home next time. I should have known the moment she waved down the waiter before I'd even sat down. Like I was still in the process of scooting my chair in, and she's already asking for a wine list and saying we'll start with the chef's tasting. Elia looked cool. She had expensive taste without trying too hard kind of vibe. Nails done, eyeliner sharp, rings on every other finger like she was either rich or really good at pretending to be. We met through some app I'd forgotten I still had. Her profile was all city skyline selfies, brunch shots, and deep quotes in the captions. She looked confident, and her messages were short and dry, which I weirdly found kind of attractive. Like she was too busy living a cool life to bother with emojis. We agreed to meet at this fancy fusion spot she suggested. I looked it up after she texted the name. $20 appetizers and cocktails with herbs in them. A little out of my usual budget for a first date, but I figured, all right, maybe she's worth it. She was already sitting when I arrived. No hello hug, no smile, just a nod like we were coworkers meeting for a quarterly check-in. I tried to break the ice with a joke about the menu being too confusing, but she barely looked up from her phone. Said something about trusting the chef, then flagged the waiter again. I hadn't even glanced at the menu when she told him we'd do the tasting menu for two and then ordered a bottle of something I couldn't pronounce. The waiter looked at me like, "You good with that?" And I just nodded because I panicked and didn't want to start the night with a debate about food. I tried to steer things into actual conversation. I asked about her job. She worked in marketing for a skincare brand and had a ton of followers on Instagram because she accidentally became an influencer. She said it like it was annoying, but also like she loved it. She kept checking her phone, probably waiting to see if her latest post got more likes. Then we got into heavier stuff. I made a comment about how I'd recently started therapy, just in passing. Like I wasn't trying to trauma dump. It just came up when we were talking about stress and work-life balance. I said something like, "Yeah, therapy's been helping me figure out how to actually chill when I'm not working." And she made this face like I just told her I collect used tissues or something. She put down her glass and said, "Oh, you're one of those." I asked what that meant, and she launched into this full-on rant about how people use therapy as a crutch. Said the world's too soft now. That in her family they dealt with stuff privately and got over things like adults. I was literally mid-sip trying not to react too hard, because what do you even say to that? She went on for like 10 minutes, saying people spend too much time talking about feelings instead of just fixing their problems. She brought up her cousin who'd done therapy for years and was still a mess. Said therapy was a scam that just teaches people how to be victims. I was stunned, like genuinely sitting there, blinking, wondering how I ended up at dinner with someone who sounded like a Facebook comment section. She asked if I'd been in therapy long, and when I said a couple months, she nodded like she was diagnosing me. Said something like, "You probably just need more structure in your life, not a stranger to talk to." And the whole time she was still sipping her wine and commenting on the food like she was on a cooking show. The tasting menu came out in tiny plates with swirls and garnishes, and she rated each one out loud. Said the duck confit lacked depth, and the ceviche was safe. I couldn't believe how serious she was about it all, like she was Gordon Ramsay on a Tinder date. I asked if she liked cooking, and she said she didn't believe in wasting time in the kitchen. That's why restaurants exist. I tried to keep it light, hoping maybe we could pivot back to something normal. Asked about her last vacation, and she said she didn't do vacations. She did escapes, whatever that means. She told me about this solo trip she did in Bali and how it was life-changing, but not in a cheesy spiritual way, more like she realized she doesn't need people. That's how she said it. I don't need people. I didn't even know how to respond. She had this intense way of saying stuff like she expected applause afterward. Toward the end of dinner, I made a comment about how the dessert looked cool, and she rolled her eyes and said, "Do you always talk this much about food?" I laughed because I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She meant. When the check came, she looked at me and said, "You got this right." Like it was already decided. I paid mostly just to get the night over with. It wasn't worth the energy to argue. She didn't say thank you, just stood up, said, "Cool meeting you," and walked out like she had somewhere better to be. I sat there for a second just processing everything. The unsolicited order, the anti-therapy rant, the part where she treated dinner like a Yelp review. It was like being on a date with someone who thought vulnerability was a weakness and conversation was a waste of time. I left the restaurant and deleted the app on the spot. Sometimes the universe sends you a walking red flag and says, "Here to reminder." So yeah, Elia was memorable. Not in a good way, but definitely not forgettable. Okay, so this one started off with me thinking I was just meeting a regular divorced dad for coffee. You know, harmless Sunday afternoon vibes. I wasn't expecting sparks or anything wild, just a simple date at that artsy little cafe near the park with the mismatched chairs and vinyl playing quietly in the background. The kind of place where you drink something with oat milk and pretend it's not weird that there's a bookshelf in the bathroom. Luke and I had been chatting online for a week or two, and he seemed chill. His photos were mostly of him hiking, one of him holding a fish, classic, and one cute one with a kid who I assumed was his. He didn't say too much about being a dad except that his son was a huge part of his life, which I respected. I figured we'd have our coffee, talk about random stuff, maybe laugh a little and call it a day. I wasn't expecting a commitment talk or anything serious. But when I showed up, he was already there and not alone. He was sitting outside wearing sunglasses like a dad version of a movie spy, and across from him was a boy who looked about 13 or 14. At first, I thought maybe he was just saying hi to his son before walking him home or something, but nope. Luke stood up, introduced me, and said, "This is my son, Trevor. He's joining us." I didn't even know how to react. I kind of smiled and gave a little awkward wave, and Trevor just nodded like this was no big deal, like he was used to third-wheeling his dad's love life. So yeah, we sat down at this tiny cafe table built for two, except there were now three of us. I ordered a cold brew and Luke got some lavender thing, while Trevor asked if he could get a cookie and an iced tea, which Luke approved like he was a manager of a school cafeteria. I tried to roll with it. Maybe it was a last-minute thing. Maybe his sitter bailed and he didn't want to cancel. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but 5 minutes in, I realized this wasn't random. Luke had brought his son on purpose. He started asking me these really pointed questions like, what kind of values were you raised with? And do you think discipline is important for kids? While Trevor just sat there watching me like he was taking mental notes. At one point, Luke literally said, "I just want to make sure anyone I bring into my life is going to be a good influence on my boy." I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to be flattered or freaked out. I mean, this was the first time we'd ever met in person, and suddenly I was being evaluated like a potential stepmom. I didn't even know this guy's last name yet. And now I'm fielding questions about parenting philosophies while sipping cold brew and trying not to sweat. Trevor wasn't rude or anything, but he was very present. Like he wasn't looking at his phone or zoning out. He was watching us the whole time, listening, occasionally chiming in too. He asked if I liked sports. I said not really, and he made this disappointed face, then looked at his dad like, next. Luke laughed and said, "We're big on basketball at our house," which I guess was code for you better start liking it too. And he started talking about their Sunday routines. Church, pickup games at the YMCA, movie night. And he kept saying we like I was already part of it. I'd known them in real life for literally 20 minutes. Then came the kicker. Luke pulled out a little notebook from his jacket pocket. Not joking, a real notebook. And he said, "I hope this doesn't make you uncomfortable, but I made a few notes about things I wanted to ask." My soul left my body for a second. He started reading off questions. Real, actual questions. Stuff like, what's your stance on screen time for teens? And would you be okay dating someone who still co-parents with their ex regularly? Trevor even chimed in to say his mom wasn't very chill about stuff, whatever that meant. I kept trying to laugh it off like, "Oh, wow, but you're very organized." But it didn't stop. He asked if I cooked, if I wanted kids someday, if I'd ever been with someone with a kid before. I looked around like, is this some kind of social experiment? Are there cameras? The weirdest part was that Luke wasn't being creepy. He was just intense, like full on ready to find a partner and insert them into his pre-built life. He seemed to think this was efficient. Why waste time? If Trevor didn't like me, that was that. He even said it. If Trevor doesn't vibe with someone, it usually doesn't work out. I wanted to crawl under the table. When the check came, he paid for all three of us and said, "Thanks for being so open. This was really productive." Productive, like we'd just finished a meeting. Then Trevor stood up, shook my hand, no joke, an actual handshake, and said, "Nice meeting you. Good luck. Good luck." I left that cafe like I'd just been on a job interview I didn't apply for, walked straight to my car, and just sat there processing. I get it. People with kids have to approach dating differently, I really do. But bringing your kid to the first date and then grilling me with a notebook, that's not being upfront. That's just weird. And Trevor, cool kid, but he definitely looked like he's been through this process more than once, which was honestly kind of sad. So yeah, Luke and his son were thorough. I haven't seen either of them since, obviously. I'm sure they've got some scoring system at home for every date Luke brings around. I probably didn't pass the basketball question. This one still makes my stomach do that uncomfortable twist when I think about it. Like, not in a dramatic way, but in that I ignored my instincts and now I need to unpack that kind of way. So I met Abby at this art exhibit my friend dragged me to. One of those small gallery nights where everyone's pretending to understand abstract stuff and sipping wine from plastic cups. She was standing alone, looking at this massive black and red canvas like it had told her a secret. I remember thinking she looked cool, like someone who worked in a bookstore but only read poetry. She had this quiet confidence, all black clothes, chunky boots, silver jewelry, that effortless kind of mysterious. I made a joke about the painting looking like a microwave meal exploded, and she laughed in this low, throaty way that made me feel like I'd just won something. We talked for a bit, music, books, the usual, and exchanged numbers. A few days later, she messaged me asking if I wanted to grab drinks. She picked the spot, a little bar tucked behind a flower shop, and I was already impressed. It was dark with fairy lights and weird music playing. She showed up in this long coat and greeted me with a compliment that felt slightly too observant, like she'd studied the way I styled my hair or something. Anyway, the night started off good. We talked for hours. She was a little intense, like she stared really hard when we were talking and asked really specific questions, like what my childhood bedroom looked like or if I ever thought about moving to a different country just for the hell of it. She had that energy where it's hard to tell if she's flirting or doing a character study on you. At some point, we started talking about how weird dating can be. She brought up how exhausting it is to try to figure people out when they're just presenting the version of themselves they want to be. I agreed. We were a few drinks in and it felt kind of deep at the time. She leaned in a little and said something like, "I already know you're not fake though." I made sure. That was the moment the vibe started to change. I kind of laughed and asked what she meant, expecting something normal like your vibe's just honest or whatever. But she didn't laugh. She stirred her drink and said, "I followed you home after we met. Just once. Just to make sure you were telling the truth about where you lived." I don't even know how to describe the moment right after she said that. Like everything slowed down and my brain went completely quiet trying to understand if I heard it right. I stared at her for a second, waiting for a just kidding, but it didn't come. She just kept looking at me, super calm, like this was totally normal. She explained, and I'm paraphrasing because my brain was already in emergency mode, that after we met at the gallery, she had this feeling I wasn't telling the truth. She said she'd had bad experiences before, people lying about their whole lives, and she didn't want to waste time. So she waited outside the gallery for like 20 minutes, followed me on the train, and made sure I actually lived where I said I did. I asked her if she was joking, and she looked genuinely confused that I'd be bothered. She said something like, "If you have nothing to hide, why does it matter?" I didn't even know how to react. Like, yeah, people Google each other all the time, maybe scroll through socials, but physically following someone. That's not curiosity, that's a problem. A full-on red flag waving in my face with an air horn attached. And she just kept talking. Told me she liked how predictable I seemed. That she could tell I had a routine and that felt safe to her. That was supposed to be a compliment, I think. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I just kind of sat there, stuck in this weird moment of disbelief. Part of me was scared to make her mad. Part of me didn't want to believe it was as weird as it clearly was. She didn't seem dangerous. She was so chill about it that it almost tricked me into thinking I was overreacting. She paid for the drinks, by the way, like she was being courteous, like none of that had just happened. When we walked out, she offered me a ride home. I told her I had someone picking me up. Total lie. I just walked in the opposite direction until I was out of her view, then took the long way home with my hoodie up and my headphones out. That night I didn't sleep well. I kept replaying everything. How she never asked where I lived again because she already knew. How she said it so casually like it was part of some moral dating process, like I was lucky to be vetted. It made me wonder how many other people she'd done that with, if she followed anyone else, if she'd do it again. I blocked her the next morning. No message, no explanation. I deleted her number, archived the texts, and just kind of pushed it all out of my head. I didn't tell a lot of people about it at first because it just sounded so bizarre. But the more I sat with it, the weirder it felt. Not because she was loud or aggressive or rude, but because she was so calm about the whole thing. Like she thought it made her careful, smart. The weirdest part is, if she hadn't told me, I never would have known. She didn't leave any signs. She didn't seem off when we first met. But that's what messed me up the most, how easy it was to be fooled by someone who looks completely normal. So yeah, that was Abby. Cool coat, great taste in bars, and apparently no problem with tailing strangers through public transport. I met Dan through a dating app I barely use, the one I only open when I'm bored on the train or can't sleep at 2 a.m. We matched on a Sunday, talked for like 2 days, and he asked if I wanted to meet for lunch. He picked this trendy Mediterranean place that I'd never been to but had heard people mention. It was one of those spots where the plates are too small, and they act like hummus is a personality trait. Anyway, Dan showed up wearing a blazer for lunch, like we were closing a business deal. He was clean cut, a little too clean maybe. His hair was perfectly in place, and his shoes looked like they hadn't touched a sidewalk. He shook my hand like he was greeting a client, not a date, and thanked me for being on time, which instantly felt like a weird thing to say, but I brushed it off. Some people are just stiff when they're nervous. We sat down, and he immediately asked if I liked the place. I said I hadn't been before, and he nodded, saying, "Good, then we're starting with something new." Felt it cool, a little intense, but I figured maybe he was just one of those assertive types who likes taking the lead. Things started normal enough. He asked about my job, I told him. He asked follow-ups, but they were all super pointed. Like, what's your typical day look like? And do you work from home or in an office? And would you consider your coworkers mostly male or female? Which felt oddly specific, but still not creepy yet. Then it started to shift. He brought up how dating in the modern world was incredibly high risk for people like him. I asked what he meant, thinking he was going to talk about costing or dating app scams or something. But no. Dan said he'd been burned in the past and had decided to approach dating more seriously and more professionally. I asked him to explain, and he said, completely casually, that he now only dates women who are open to background checks. I thought he was joking, like genuinely. I laughed. He didn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a paper folder. A folder on a date. He slid it across the table and said, "I have a standard release form I asked all my dates to review. It's nothing invasive. Just consent to run a basic background check. No credit scores, no health info. Strictly public record." I just stared at the folder like it was radioactive. Like, what do you even say to that? I opened it because I was too stunned not to. Inside was a printed form, like something from my HR department, full of blanks for name, address, date of birth, and a little box at the bottom for a signature. It even had his name typed out at the top in a different font, like he made it on Canva or something. I asked if he was serious, and he nodded like it was the most logical thing in the world. Said he had too many bad run-ins with women who lied about who they were. One apparently had a DUI she didn't mention. One used a fake name. One clearly had issues, whatever that meant. He said this system gave him peace of mind. Called it filtering, like I was in the email. I was so thrown off I just sat there, holding a pita chip like it was going to defend me. Then he said, "I don't ask anything I'm not willing to do myself," and pulled out another folder. This one had his background check inside. Yes, he had done one on himself, and brought copies. He slid one across the table and said, "Feel free to keep that." I didn't even want to touch it, but I looked. It had his name, age, a report saying he'd never been arrested, his employment history, and a line that literally read, "No outstanding warrants." It was so clinical it made me feel like I was in an HR office instead of a restaurant. The waiter came by right then and asked if we were ready to order. I was still holding this folder, and Dan just smiled and said, Give us another minute, like we were doing paperwork instead of flirting. I asked if he really expected people to just hand over their info like that. He said, anyone with good intentions wouldn't have a problem. I said, that's not how trust works. He disagreed. He said trust had to be earned and verified, like we were doing a rental application. I asked if he'd ever had someone actually fill it out, and he said yes, twice. Once it led to a 3-month relationship. The other time the girl ghosted him after 2 dates, and he called that a successful early disqualification. His words, not mine. I told him I wasn't comfortable giving out my info like that. He said, no problem, but you could tell it was a problem. His whole tone changed. He leaned back, crossed his arms, and said something like, I guess we're now aligned on our values, and that was that. We still ordered food. Don't ask me why. I was hungry already there. But the conversation got super dry. He talked about his work, logistics manager, go figure, and I mostly just nodded. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't even finish my drink. The worst part, at the end, when the check came, he split it without even asking. Took his copy of the release form back too. Said, thanks for your time, like I just interviewed for a role at his company. I left with that weird background check paper in my bag like a cursed item. When I got home, I tossed it in the trash. Then I told my roommate everything, and we just sat on the couch howling. Not because it was funny. I mean, it kind of was. But because it was so unbelievably weird. Who brings folders to a date? Dan probably thought he was being responsible, safe, efficient. But honestly, if your idea of romance starts with paperwork, maybe dating's not your thing. Cindy was one of those matches that seemed too good to be true, and honestly, I should have listened to that little inner voice that said, slow down the second she liked 3 of my pictures in a row. But I didn't. I was riding the endorphin high of someone attractive messaging first, and she was fast with it too. No weird waiting period, just straight into the chat like we'd already met before. She was funny in this kind of dry, sarcastic way, and she called me out on my overuse of commas, which I found weirdly hot. So I agreed to meet up. She picked a place, of course, a rooftop bar with a view of the river where everything on the menu had a name like Smoky Dream or Lavender Spark. It was clearly the kind of spot where she wanted to be seen, and I wasn't mad at that. I dressed up a little more than usual, showed up 5 minutes early, and watched a couple next to me get into a full-blown fight over sushi rolls. I remember that because it was the last normal thing I saw all evening. Cindy walked in like she owned the place. Black dress, heels, big earrings, everything about her screamed high effort, which I respected. She hugged me like we were old friends, not strangers who exchanged 12 messages and 2 gifts, and sat down with this big smile like she already knew how the night was gonna go. That should have been my first clue. Right off the bat, she took over. I don't mean in an overbearing way. At first, it was kind of nice. She asked questions, ordered drinks for both of us without even pausing to check what I liked, and told the waiter with confidence that we'd be having a full night, so we'd keep the drink tab open. I barely got a word in before she launched into a story about her last vacation, where she apparently flew to Greece just because her horoscope told her to. I tried to keep up, I really did. She was charming, she had stories, and she talked fast, like New York fast. But there was this underlying thing where everything she said had a punchline, and the punchline was always about money. Like when she talked about her ex who worked in tech, and how she wasted 6 months trying to date a man who thought splitting a dinner bill was romantic. Or how she once blocked someone because he didn't own bedsheets with a thread count over 500. She laughed as she said all of this like it was just part of her personality, ruthless but honest. I tried to laugh along. At one point I said something about being a public sector guide, just to let her know I wasn't out here rolling in cash, and she paused, tilted her head like she was doing mental math, then smiled and said, well, at least you're consistent. I can work with that. That was when I started to feel like I was being sized up. And then it happened. The moment that completely turned the night from quirky first date to tell your friends right away level of insane. She sipped her drink, leaned forward over the little table candle, and said, totally casual, so, do you have life insurance? I thought I misheard. I laughed and said, wait, what? Because I figured maybe she meant health insurance or something, or maybe it was a setup for a joke. But no, she clarified, life insurance. As in, do I have a policy? Who's the beneficiary? And do I believe in long-term planning? I sat there blinking. She went on to say she always asks guys that early on because it says a lot about how seriously they take the future. I said something like, "Isn't that a little intense?" And she shrugged and said, "I mean, if I'm gonna marry someone, they better be worth more to me dead than alive, right?" And then she laughed like it was the best joke she'd ever told. I laughed too, but mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I took a long sip of my drink and tried to change the subject. I said something about music or concerts or literally anything that didn't involve death planning, but she kept circling back. She started doing this bit about how her dream job would be retired rich wife, and how she wouldn't mind marrying someone old as long as his will was updated. She said all of this while giggling and sipping her drink like we were on a comedy podcast instead of a date. The more she talked, the more I realized everything was a bit with her. Nothing was real. She kept joking about getting rich off someone else's hard work and said things like, "Why should I work when I'm cute?" And ambition is for women who don't know how to manipulate properly. It was like she had rehearsed lines for every part of the date. And don't get me wrong, some people joke about gold digging in a tongue-in-cheek way, but with Cindy, I couldn't tell if she was kidding, like at all, especially when she started asking me what my apartment looked like, and if I owned or rented, and how much I paid. She said she was just curious, but her eyes lit up when I said I lived alone and paid above average for my neighborhood. I tried to wrap things up after that. Said I had to be up early, which was true, but also I didn't want to stick around for her to start asking about my blood type. She pouted a little but didn't seem mad. Just said, "You're fun. Maybe not rich, but stable." And that felt less like a compliment and more like a verdict. As we were walking out, she linked arms with me and said, "Let me know if you get promoted, okay?" Like she was already ranking me against future options. I went home and sat on my couch for a while, just replaying the whole thing. It wasn't even a bad date in the traditional sense. There was no yelling, no awkward silences, no weird chewing noises. But it left me feeling like I'd just been reviewed like a resume. Like Cindy wasn't dating for love or even chemistry. She was building a portfolio, and it was just another asset she was evaluating. If she ever messages me again, I'll politely decline, unless I take out $1 million policy and feel like living dangerously. I met Coco on this low-key dating app that barely anyone uses anymore, the kind that somehow still looks like it was designed in 2014. His bio was short and kind of vague. Just said, "Family is everything." Big on honesty. Let's not waste time. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. He looked decent in his pics, had a smile that made him seem harmless, and he replied fast, which I appreciated after dealing with all those weird, "takes 3 days to respond but watches your stories" people. We messaged for a few days and decided to meet on a Saturday. He said he knew a good place for coffee and I was down. I figured it'd be chill, 45 minutes max, and if he turned out to be weird, I could fake a work emergency or something. He sent me the address the night before and I looked it up. Cute little cafe attached to a bookstore, right next to this park with geese that always chase people. Pretty safe, pretty standard. So I show up on time and I see him sitting outside already. He stands when I approach, gives me this big hug like we've been friends for years, and right away I can tell he's one of those super confident, hyper decisive types. He starts walking before I can even ask if he wants to go in or sit outside, and I just kind of follow him like, "Okay, guess we're doing this your way." He doesn't lead me to the cafe. He leads me to a car. I'm like, "Wait, where are we going?" And he goes, "Just a quick drive. Trust me, you'll love it. Way better than sitting around drinking overpriced lats." And I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the way he said it so casually, or maybe I was just too stunned to argue, but I got in. The drive wasn't long. 10 minutes tops. But when we pulled into this suburban street full of neat little houses and identical mailboxes, I got this weird feeling in my stomach. I asked again where we were going, and he just smiled and said, "Don't worry, it's a surprise." I started texting my friend just in case. Like, "Hey, I might be walking into something weird. If I text you a pineapple emoji, call me with an emergency." We park in front of a house. A literal house. I look at him and he just says, "Come on, this'll be fun." I follow him up the walkway thinking maybe he's picking something up or dropping something off, or who even knows anymore. But then he rings the doorbell. His mom opens the door. No joke. This woman, mid-50s, floral apron, greets him with a kiss on the cheek and says, You must be the one he's been talking about. I'm frozen. I look at Coco like, dude, what? And he just beams at me and says, yeah, figured it's better to get this part over with early. If they don't like you, it's a waste of time. He took me to his parents on the first date. Before I could even fake a phone call or invent a sudden case of the flu, his mom ushered us inside like we were already engaged. She offered me lemonade. His dad was in the living room watching TV with the volume way too high. And when he saw me, he just grunted something like about time and nodded toward the couch. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I was too busy internally spiraling. I kept saying things like, this wasn't the plan, and you should have told me, and this is way too soon. And he just laughed and said, it's not like we're getting married. Just be yourself. They'll love you. Then his mom started asking me questions, like full-on interview mode. What do I do? Am I religious? Do I want kids? What's my stance on joint bank accounts? I answered as politely as I could while trying to figure out how to escape without being rude, but it was like she didn't notice my panic, or she just didn't care. At one point, she asked what my parents did for a living, and if they were still together, like she was trying to assess my background for stability or something. Meanwhile, Coco just stood there with his arms crossed, watching like he was studying my responses. Like I was a contestant on some dating reality show where the prize was his mother's approval. He kept saying stuff like, isn't she great? And see, I told you she had manners, like I was a puppy he found at the shelter. I tried to pull him aside and ask what the hell was going on. He said this was just his way, and that he didn't want to waste weeks getting to know someone only to find out his parents didn't approve. He said his last girlfriend lasted 6 months before his mom found out she didn't recycle, and that was apparently a deal breaker. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. Eventually, I said I needed to leave. Made up a thing about picking up my friend from the airport. His mom looked disappointed, but still packed me a bag of cookies for the road. Coco walked me out and tried to kiss me, and I dodged it so hard I almost tripped on the porch step. On the drive back, I didn't say much. He didn't either. He dropped me at the original cafe like nothing had happened and said, let me know what your schedule looks like next weekend. I want you to meet my aunt. I said, sure, just to get out of the car. I blocked his number before I even finished walking home. Later that night, I told my friend the whole thing and she said, you went to a second location. Rookie move. And yeah, she was right. But who expects a surprise parent visit on the first date? That's not even the top 10 things I thought I'd have to be ready for. Coco probably still out there dragging unsuspecting girls into living rooms to see if they passed the vibe check from his family. This one started out pretty smooth, not gonna lie. Violet was cute, like effortlessly put together without looking like she tried too hard. Her photos were all natural lighting and messy hair, and she had this vibe that made her seem chill but probably secretly organized. She messaged first, which caught my attention immediately. She said something like, your dog is cuter than you. And yeah, it was a little cheesy, but I appreciated the confidence. We ended up talking for a few days, just texting back and forth, pretty normal stuff. Favorite movies, weird food combos. Whether or not pineapple belongs on pizza, it does, and she strongly disagreed. She mentioned she was a bit of a night owl and liked to research things, which I didn't think much of at the time. Thought it just meant she spent too much time on Reddit or fell into Wikipedia holes about serial killers like the rest of us. She suggested we meet at this brunch spot that looked like an Instagram fever dream. Pastel walls, hanging plants, every drink came in a mason jar. I showed up wearing a hoodie and jeans, thinking it was a Loki vibe. She showed up looking like she was about to host a lifestyle YouTube channel. Long coat, big sunglasses like already in hand, and a tote bag that looked like it cost more than my rent. We hugged, sat down, and immediately she started complimenting the cafe like she owned it. Said she'd been there tons of times, even though the waiter greeted her like he'd never seen her in his life. I didn't question it. Some people just need to feel like a regular everywhere they go. Anyway, things started off fine. She asked questions, made good eye contact, laughed at my dumb jokes. But then, out of nowhere, she drops this sentence. So I looked up your mom's Facebook last night. She seemed sweet. I froze. I literally just blinked at her, trying to figure out if she was joking or not. But she was dead serious, smiling like this was completely normal. I laughed awkwardly and asked how she even found it, and she just casually said she Googled my full name, found a few old school records, and pieced things together from mutual tags and photos. Like she was describing how she put together a jigsaw puzzle, not how she cyber-stalked my entire family. She said my mom posts a lot, and that it was kind of cute. Then she asked if my sister was doing okay after the divorce. And that's when I realized how deep she'd gone, because I had never told her about my sister, never mentioned the divorce. That wasn't even public on my profile. My sister's super private and barely posts anything. I sat there stunned while Violet started casually throwing out other little things she had learned. She knew what town my parents lived in. She knew where my cousin worked. She asked if my niece was still doing ballet like she'd been to a recital. I asked her, kind of laughing but also kind of not, if she always researched people like this before a first date. She said, of course, you can't trust people until you do your homework. She said it like it was smart. Like I should be flattered that she took the time to do a full FBI dive before even sitting across from me. She kept going. Asked if my uncle was still living in Toronto. Wanted to know if my dad was retired yet. Well, I didn't answer right away. She just nodded and said, I figured. His Facebook hasn't updated since last year. At that point, I wasn't even focused on the food anymore. I was sitting there doing mental damage control, trying to remember what info I'd ever put online and what she could possibly connect it together. I don't post much. My profiles are locked down. But apparently, that doesn't matter if your mom still tags you in every birthday post and your aunt still leaves public comments on your photos. Violet wasn't even being creepy about it in the way you'd expect. She wasn't weird or giggling or trying to keep it secret. She talked like this was totally normal, even admirable, like her digging into my family tree made her some kind of responsible dater. She said, you'd be surprised what people lie about. I'm just being efficient. I tried to steer the conversation to something lighter. Movies, music, anything that didn't involve my childhood home address. But she kept circling back to my family. She said she felt like she already kind of knew them, which was the creepiest thing she said all afternoon. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she found of my cousin's wedding. I wasn't even in the picture. She just thought it was a cute venue. When I didn't respond, she smiled and said, don't worry, I didn't look up anything weird. Which, like, what does she consider weird if this is normal? I made an excuse and said I had to meet a friend after brunch, even though my only plan that day was to go home and bleach my brain. She offered to walk with me, but I declined. She gave me a long hug, said she'd go to meet my mom eventually, and told me to tell my sister she was rooting for her, like we were already merged into the same life or something. When I got home, I checked my own name online just to see what she could have found, and honestly, she must have gone page after page into Google. Some of the stuff she'd brought up had to be from old school newsletters or tagged photos I hadn't seen in years. It was impressive in the worst way. I texted her that night saying I didn't think we should go out again. She replied immediately and said, totally fair. Wish you the best. Which kind of scared me more, like she already knew that was coming. That was Violet. A human search engine with a tote bag and a terrifying amount of curiosity. I still make sure my family tightens their privacy settings every few months just in case. I met Tyler at this taco spot where they give you salsa in these tiny glass jars and act like it's the most authentic thing in the world. It was one of those first dates where you go in expecting maybe some awkward small talk and a beer, and instead you walk away questioning the entire concept of modern dating. His profile had big energy, like shirtless at the beach, motorcycle in the background, life's a ride kind of energy. But his messages were super polite, which kind of threw me off. He used full sentences, said please and thank you, asked me questions that weren't just wide. So I was like, okay, maybe he's one of those reformed adrenaline guys who's trying to settle down and get into plants and meal prep. We picked this chill place downtown, middle of the week, nothing too serious. I figured if it was bad, I could bail without ruining a whole Saturday. He showed up in a leather jacket, of course, and gave me this half hug that was more like a shoulder tap. His hair looked good, I'll give him that. He smiled like he knew I was already interested, and I probably was at first. I can't lie. We ordered food, made small talk, joked about the weird menu descriptions. He said he liked girls who were low drama and good with chaos, which should have been the warning sign. But I laughed like it was just a line. Then right around the time the tacos hit the table, he drops it. No lead in, no warning. Just casually says, so I have 2 girlfriends already, but they're cool with me dating around as long as I'm out front. I thought he was kidding, I really did. I said, wait, what, with a mouthful of chips, expecting him to laugh. But he didn't. He looked me dead in the eye and said, yeah, they're poly. It's kind of my thing. Now listen, I'm not judging people who live that life. If that works for you, awesome. But springing it on someone in the middle of their first taco is not the move. He went on to explain that he's been in 2 relationships for about a year. One girl lives with him part-time. The other one's long distance. They both know about each other and about me, apparently, even though this was our literal first date. He said they were fine with it because they trust him, and now he just needed to see if I could handle it too. I tried to process it without making a face, but I know I failed. I just nodded slowly and took a long sip of my drink. He asked if I'd ever tried non-monogamy, like it was a sport or a new restaurant. I told him no, and he said, that's fine. Most people just need the right entry point. Entry point. He started giving me this whole breakdown. Said the world's too obsessed with possession, that love doesn't have to be exclusive, that it's all about communication and trust. Meanwhile, I was sitting there like, dude, I just wanted to eat tacos and maybe flirt a little. Then he hit me with this line, there's always room for one more if you're open-minded enough. He said it like he was offering me a seat at the cool kids table, like I should feel lucky. He even started listing the benefits, less pressure, more freedom, someone always around when you need them. He said monogamy was a trap built on insecurity and ego. It was like listening to a podcast no one asked for. At one point I asked, what happens if someone catches feelings and wants to be exclusive? And he shrugged and said, then they're not the right fit for the system. The system, like this was a software app and not people's emotions. He told me about how one of his girlfriends used to get jealous, but now they all have check-in nights where they talk about their feelings and rate their weeks from 1 to 10. I asked if I'd be expected to do that too when he smiled and said, only if you're serious. Casual girls don't do the chart. I swear I started to zone out right around then. My brain was just scrolling a mental to-do list while he explained how to schedule dates in a shared Google Calendar. Like, how did I go from want to grab dinner to join my emotional filing system with 2 other women? He asked if I had any deal breakers, and I said, being one of 3 is probably it. He laughed like I was joking, and I didn't correct him. He told me I seemed cool enough to handle it, and that I had main girl potential, which is somehow the worst compliment I've ever gotten. Like, congrats. I might be promoted in your relationship pyramid if I play my cards right. When the check came, he offered to split it, then said, unless you might count this as your intro meeting, like I was applying for a job. I paid my half just to be done with it. He gave me a hug at the door, said he'd keep me in the loop, and walked off like he'd just closed a deal. I stood there for a second wondering how I got through an entire meal without flipping the table. On the train home, I texted my group chat everything and got hit with 10 laughing emojis and 3 old news. One friend said I should have asked for the names of the other 2 so I could warn them. Another said, at least he didn't lie. And yeah, he was honest. I'll give him that. But honest doesn't mean normal. So that was Tyler. Man of the people. Builder of spreadsheets. Romantic in the most logistical way. If he ever calls, I'll probably ghost him. Unless I decide to join a cult. In that case, he's already got the framework. Lauren looked like money. That's not me being dramatic, that's just what it was. Every inch of her screamed expensive. Hair that bounced like it had a personal glam squad, nails perfectly squared and glossy, and that perfume you smell in department stores that cost more than a week of groceries. Her profile had pictures in yachts, rooftop bars, and those over-filtered Bali swings that every influencer uses. But her messages, super chill, all lowercase, kind of playful. She had this cool girl thing going on that made me think maybe she was just someone who liked the luxury but wasn't a snob about it. We matched on a Thursday and she wanted to meet by Saturday. Fast. She said she didn't like to waste time, which I respected, because half the people on dating apps treat messaging like a part-time job with no benefits. She picked this wine bar downtown, the kind of place where even the chairs looked like they had trust funds. I showed up in a decent button-down, nothing fancy, just enough to not look like I got lost on my way to the bus stop. She walked in 15 minutes late, no apology, holding a phone that looked like it had never once touched a charger under 50%. She smiled, kissed me on the cheek, sat down, and immediately waved the waiter over. When I tried to ask if she wanted to split a bottle or order by the glass, she looked at me like I just asked her to drink from a hose. She told the guy we'd be having the Malbec, the good one, and didn't even glance at me while doing it. I just went with it. Figured maybe she was nervous and overcompensating or just used to taking control. But then came the comment. Right after we ordered food, she got the steak, I got the pasta. She leaned back, sipped her wine, and said, "So you're in marketing, right?" That's like ads and basic branding stuff. I said, yeah, kinda, trying not to get into a whole spiel about how my job is more than just making logos. She smirked and went, "That's cute. Honestly, I've never really dated anyone with a regular job before." Cute. She said it in the same tone you'd use if someone told you they collect bottle caps or volunteer at a dog shelter on weekends. And then she kept going. Said she was used to more ambitious guys, hedge fund bros, crypto dudes, startup founders. She said used to, but the way she looked at me, it was clear she meant preferred. She started asking questions that sounded like they came from a financial screening. How much do you make? Do you rent or own? What's your 5-year plan? And do you have any investments? I tried to answer lightly, throw a joke in there, but she didn't even smile. She wrote me off in her head the second I said I didn't own property. At some point I said something like, "I like what I do," and she raised her eyebrows like I'd admitted to enjoying being broke. She told me that her time was valuable, and she wasn't really in a place in life where she wanted to support someone else's basic lifestyle. That's a direct quote. Then the real kicker, she said, "I think men should always pay, at least at the start. It's just a respect thing." I didn't even argue. I just nodded and mentally started calculating how much this wine was going to cost me. We were like 30 minutes in at that point, and I was already ready to leave. But I stayed because walking out would have turned it into a story for her group chat, and I wasn't giving her the satisfaction. I asked her about her work. She was in luxury fashion consulting, which I still don't totally understand. She mostly name-dropped brands and said she helped high-net-worth clients elevate their aesthetic presence. When I asked what that actually meant, she said, "It's just something you give if you're in the scene." I was very much not in the scene. She went on a mini rant about how men these days have no ambition, and how it was exhausting trying to date guys who didn't strive for more. She asked me if I ever thought about getting out of the 9 to 5 trap, and I said not really. I like structure. She wrinkled her nose like I just said I enjoy parking tickets. When the bill came, she didn't even look at it. Just handed the leather folder to me and said, "Thanks for dinner." Not a question. Not a pause. Just straight up expected it. Which I knew she would, so I had my card out already. But it was the way she said it, like I was the help, and she was just doing her weekly charity. She didn't offer to Venmo, didn't say thanks, just grabbed her purse, stood up, and said, "This was fun." And yeah, she said it like she didn't mean it. I walked her out because I'm not a total monster, and she hit me with, "You're sweet. You'll make some girl really happy one day. Just probably not me." Which I guess was honest, but also unnecessary. I went home, took off my shoes, and lay on the couch for an hour thinking about how wild it is that some people really think they're royalty just because they buy overpriced wine and have an Instagram following. The thing is, she didn't even have to be that way. She was smart, confident. She could have just said we weren't a match. But no, she had to drag my job, my income, and a whole vibe through the dirt before disappearing into the night. Lauren was basically the walking version of a luxury handbag with a superiority complex. I don't even know why I agreed to go out with Nathan. Like looking back, there were little signs that should have stopped me. Its profile had one too many gym selfies. He listed loyalty and not into games twice in his bio, and he had that weird habit of texting only at night like he was on some secret schedule. But he was funny. Not in a trying too hard way, more like sarcastic with good timing. He used a Parks and Rec gif once, and it landed perfectly, so I figured why not. We decided on a midweek dinner, nothing fancy. This cozy little Italian place with string lights and homemade bread that never stops coming. I was actually kind of looking forward to it. He'd been texting me a lot leading up to it, asking what I like to eat, making playlists, even sending me dumb TikToks during the day. It felt like maybe for once, someone was actually excited to meet me. So I got there a little early, grabbed a table in the corner, and tried not to look like I was waiting too hard. He showed up 5 minutes late. No big deal. wearing a denim jacket and cologne that definitely wasn't subtle. He'd be a half hug, sat down, and started talking like we were already in the middle of a conversation. That kind of thing I usually like. Easy flow, no awkward pauses. Except this time, I could tell he was a little distracted. At first, I figured maybe it was work stress. He kept checking his phone and flipping it back over, like he was waiting for something but didn't want me to notice. Every time it buzzed, he looked at it and sighed, then tried to jump back into the conversation with some random comment on my earrings or the food or whatever. Then halfway through our appetizers, right after I said something dumb about dipping bread in olive oil being the highlight of my week, he blurted out, "Do you think she looks happier without me?" I blinked. I was mid-bite. I didn't even know what she he was talking about yet. Then he turned his phone toward me and showed me a photo. His ex, at a beach, holding a drink, smiling. I didn't even have time to react before he said, "I mean, look at her. She never smiled like that when we were together." I thought he was joking, or testing me, or maybe drunk. But no, he just started scrolling through her Instagram right there at the table. No shame. He showed me another photo, her in a new apartment, and said, "She moved already, like barely a month after we ended things. She's fast." I asked, carefully, "Are you okay?" And he shrugged and said, "Yeah, it's whatever. I'm just trying to get perspective, you know." Then he started telling me about their relationship, how they were together for 2 years, how they lived together for one of them, how things fizzled out and she got distant, and then she broke it off. He said it casually, but I could tell he hadn't processed it. Not even close. This man was very much still in the middle of that emotional storm. He said she hadn't blocked him, so he figured she was open to staying in each other's lives. I said that maybe she just didn't want drama. He didn't like that. He said something like, "You don't know her. She's complex." And I was like, "No, I don't know her." I didn't expect to be learning about her or mushroom ravioli either. Then came the weirdest part. He asked if I wanted to see a picture of them together. Just to get context, he said. I declined, politely, which he ignored. He pulled up a photo of them at some festival, both smiling, both tanned and happy, and he pointed to it and said, "We looked solid, right?" I didn't even know how to answer. I was stuck in this weird position of being someone's date, and also their therapist/emotional sounding board. He kept looking at me like I was supposed to say something comforting, like, "She doesn't look that happy," or "You're better off." But I couldn't bring myself to lie. Eventually, I said, "Maybe you're not ready to be dating," and he looked kind of hurt, but then nodded. Said, "Yeah, my friend said the same, but I was hoping this would help." This, as in me, this dinner. This attempt to get over someone by dragging a complete stranger into the wreckage of his last relationship. I tried to keep it cool, finish my pasta, let him talk a bit more, mostly just nodding and throwing out the occasional "that sucks" or "wow." He showed me a screenshot of her latest story, which was just a blurry photo of a cocktail with the Drake song playing in the background. He tried to dissect the lyrics like she was sending him a message. I wanted to vanish into my bread basket. When the check came, he apologized for making it weird. I said it was fine, which was a lie, but I didn't want to make it weirder. He paid, said it was the least he could do, and then gave me this kind of sad smile, like he knew he'd blown it but couldn't help himself. Outside the restaurant, he asked if I wanted to walk a bit. I told him I was tired. He said, "Totally get it," and then he hugged me for just a little too long. As I pulled away, he said, "Thanks for being cool. Seriously, you're probably a better listener than most of my friends." That might be the saddest compliment I've ever gotten. I got in an Uber and spent the whole ride home wondering how many people out there are going on dates not because they're ready, but because they're hoping someone new will erase what the last one left behind. Nathan wasn't a bad guy, just not in the right place. And definitely not someone I ever wanted to compete with an ex-girlfriend I'd never met. Alright, so I matched with Sophie on a Sunday afternoon while I was still in bed, eating cold pizza, ignoring everything I was supposed to do that day. Her profile had that kind of confidence you don't fake. Good lighting, bold poses, a smirk that said, "I'm fun, but I'll roast you if you're boring." She messaged first, which already put her ahead of 90% of the people on there, and her opener was something ridiculous about aliens and pineapple on pizza. I laughed. I was in. We talked for maybe 3 days, super fast paced. She didn't waste time with surface level stuff. Straight to weird hypotheticals, wild stories, random voice notes of her yelling at traffic. It was chaotic, but not in a bad way, just high energy, like she was always mid adventure. She picked a place for our date. Some bar with arcade machines and neon lights and drinks named after old cartoons. It looked like a TikTok video waiting to happen, but I was down for something different. I got there first. She rolled in 10 minutes late like she owned the block, wearing a huge jacket, boots that looked like they could kick through concrete, and red lipstick that made it impossible to look away. She hugged me like we were already friends and immediately ordered 2 shots without asking. I respect a decisive person, but it was a lot right away. We sat in this booth with ripped leather and a flickering candle that felt like it could burn the place down at any moment. She talked fast, laughed louder than everyone else in the bar, and immediately started dropping all kinds of random info about her life. Jobs she quit, people she ghosted, her weird obsession with old cartoons. I tried to keep up, but I already knew this wasn't going to be a slow burn type of situation. And then, like 10 minutes in, she dropped it. So I do ove, she said, just like that. Totally casual, like someone saying they freelance or work at a bookstore. I blinked. I think I just nodded and took another sip of my drink. She smiled like she was waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. I don't really care about stuff like that. I said something dumb like, cool, you probably make bank. She laughed and said, not bad. Pays better than retail and I get to yell at people in fishnets. And just like that, the floodgates opened. She started giving me this whole breakdown. How she plans shoots, deals with weird requests, edits stuff, schedules posts, manages subscribers. She didn't hold back. This wasn't a confession. It was a full-on presentation. I wasn't even asking questions and she was just going. Said she had backup accounts, a mini following, and 2 LED lights that made her look 10 years richer. I was still trying to process all that when she pulled out her phone, opened her notes app, and showed me this bullet list titled Video Ideas. Right there between trying weird candy in a bikini and rearranging my room in costume was a note that said, fake boyfriend Q backslash, and A, must be decent looking. She grinned at me and said, you'd work, good face, chill energy, not ugly. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She leaned in and said, here's the deal. I hate filming alone. I've done it, it's fine, but the content pops more when it feels real. People eat up couples' stuff. You win. I stared at her, thinking she'd laugh and say, just kidding. But instead, she took another sip of her drink and said, you wouldn't have to do anything wild. Just help film, maybe play the supportive boyfriend angle sometimes. If you're cool on camera, maybe we make a few clips. It's chill. I pay. So now I'm sitting there, holding a drink named Sonic Boom, while a woman I've known for 20 minutes tries to recruit me into her side hustle. She didn't seem nervous or even flirty about it. It was more like a job offer with a drink menu on the side. She was serious, had numbers, follower stats, even talked about profit sharing. She told me I had trustworthy boyfriend energy, which was somehow the weirdest and most specific compliment I've ever gotten. Then she went on about how people love seeing behind the scenes stuff, and how most of her top earning posts were the low effort, high chaos ones where she wasn't even trying. I finally said something like, this is a lot for a first date, and she smiled and said, I know, but I don't believe in wasting time. She wasn't pushy, but she clearly thought I'd be into it. Told me I could think about it, no pressure. Then she ordered nachos and started talking about how she wants to do a series where she reviews bad horror movies in lingerie. I didn't even know how we got from drinks to business proposals to horror film content, but somehow it all made sense in her world. We finished our food, she paid the bill because it counts as a business meeting, and gave me a side hug on the way out. Then she said, hit me up if you want to shoot something stupid or just get drunk and play Wii Sports. I said, yeah, maybe. I didn't mean it, but she was cool in that you should only hang out with this person twice a year or you'll burn out kind of way. I walked home thinking, did I just get scouted? Not in a creepy way, more like I was a decent face at the right table on the right night, and now I'm somehow part of a content idea folder named Future Bay Energy. Sophie, business-minded, a little wild, always on the clock. If I ever see her again, I half expect the camera to already be rolling. Jake seemed normal, not in a boring way, just in that rare, actually grounded human way that's become weirdly hard to find. His profile was full of dumb jokes, pictures with dogs that probably weren't his, and one photo of him holding a fish, which is legally required for all straight men on dating apps, apparently. He didn't use any cringy pickup lines and actually asked good questions when we started chatting. Like real questions, not just what do you do or why'd. He asked what made me laugh, what my group chat looked like, and how I felt about horror movies with no plot. I was into it. We decided to get drinks on a Friday night at this pub that has board games and giant pretzels, so it felt casual. I wasn't expecting anything intense. I threw on a hoodie and boots, figured we'd have a few drinks, talk about life, maybe split some nachos if things went well. He showed up wearing a flannel and sneakers, smiling like we were already friends. The vibe was easy. Right off the bat, he was funny. Not, ha, I'm trying too hard funny, just naturally goofy. He made fun of his own beer order and told me this story about how he once accidentally joined a Zumba class because he thought it was yoga. I was genuinely laughing. It felt comfortable. He asked about my job and actually listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to one-up anything I said. So we're about an hour in, halfway through our second round, and I was already thinking this might be a rare good one. I started imagining how I describe him to my friends. Funny, good listener, not allergic to emotions. I had let my guard down, rookie mistake. He was talking about dating apps and how weird they can get, and I made a joke about the worst first date I'd ever been on. Then I asked about his, and that's when he hit me with it. He paused for a second, then said, okay, this is kind of a weird one. I went on a couple dates with my cousin once, like not super close cousin, and it was legal where we were, but yeah, that ended. I honestly thought I misheard him. I laughed, like full laughed. I said, wait, what? Thinking maybe I missed a detail. He repeated it. Same tone, same calmness, no hesitation. Yeah, it was my cousin. Third cousin or something. It's not a big deal, though. It's not like we were trying to get married or anything. I just stared at him. I didn't even know where to begin. I wasn't mad, I wasn't scared. I was just trying to compute what he was telling me. Because he said it with such confidence. Like he was telling me he once dated someone from the same college, not someone from the same family tree. He went on. Oh yeah, he had more. Said it at a wedding. Didn't realize they were related at first. Started talking, had chemistry, hung out a couple times. And when they did find out they were related, they just kept dating for a little while longer. It wasn't like we grew up together or anything, he said, as if that made it fine. I asked how long it went on, and he said a few weeks. Said it fizzled out, not because of the cousin thing, but because she moved away and we weren't really that compatible long term. Not compatible long term with his cousin. At this point, I was just sipping my drink like I was in a documentary about weird dating stories. He was totally calm. No shame. No awkwardness. Like, this was a funny story he sometimes pulled out for shock value. But the weirdest part, he wasn't telling it like he was proud or anything. He genuinely didn't think it was that big of a deal. He said something like, it's only weird in some places. People are too uptight about it. I looked it up. Third cousins isn't even that genetically risky. I almost spit my drink out. He had facts ready, like he Googled it and saved the receipts. I was like, okay, but why are you telling me this? And he just shrugged and said, I'm honest. I don't like hiding stuff. If that weirds you out, better to know now, right? I didn't even know how to respond. On one hand, yeah, honesty is good. But on the other hand, maybe don't drop the I dated my cousin bomb in the middle of date number one. There's timing. There's context. There's basic social awareness. I was trying to think of something smooth to say, but all that came out was, wow. And he just nodded like, yeah, people usually say that. We finished our drinks in awkward silence after that. He tried to bring the convo back to neutral. Asked if I liked dogs or cats more. Talked about a show he was watching, but the vibe was toast. Like, once you hear that someone casually dated their cousin, it's hard to go back to talking about Netflix recommendations. When the bill came, he offered to pay, and I said no, split it. Mostly just because I didn't want him thinking the cousin story was something I was cool with. We walked outside, and he gave me this little half smile and said, I know that was a lot, but I'm glad I told you. If you're still down to hang again, let me know. I said I'd think about it. I didn't think about it. I got home, told my roommate everything, and she stared at me for a solid 10 seconds before saying, You have got to stop trusting men with flannels and fish photos. Fair. Jake, nice guy. Chill energy. And apparently totally cool with dating within the extended family. Holly messaged me first, which was already a win in my book. Her profile had a mix of polished selfies and weird memes. One was a blurry cat with a knife, another was a tweet about using hummus as emotional support. I was into it. Her vibe was cute but unpredictable. She called herself cautiously optimistic in her bio, and that felt real enough. We joked around in the app for a few days, nothing heavy, and then she hit me with, "You seem mostly normal." Want to meet up and ruin each other's perception of dating in real life. Yes, absolutely. She picked a restaurant, said she liked places with moody lighting and bad decisions, which I figured meant somewhere dark with overpriced cocktails. I showed up in a decent shirt, tried to smell good without smelling too good, and waited at the bar because I got there early. I was scrolling through my phone, not really paying attention, when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around expecting her. It wasn't her. It was a dude, big, like gin big, crew cut wearing a plain black t-shirt, eyes scanning the room like he was waiting for someone to pull a weapon from behind the dessert menu. I said, hi. And he nodded and said, "You're meeting Holly, right?" I froze. I looked around like I was on some weird prank show. I said, "Yeah, who are you?" And he replied, completely serious on her security. Her what? Before I could process it, Holly walked in like this was all perfectly normal. Black dress, huge coat, combat boots, makeup sharp enough to cut glass. She smiled, hissed the air near my cheek, and said, "You met Micah. Don't worry, he's chill." Micah didn't look chill. He looked like he bench pressed anxiety for fun. We sat down in a booth, Holly on one side, me on the other. Micah sat at the table behind us, just far enough to not be in the conversation, but close enough to hear every word. He ordered a ginger ale, crossed his arms, and stared at a fake plant like it owed him money. I leaned in and whispered, "What's happening right now?" And Holly smiled and said, "Oh, I always bring someone to first dates, just in case." I blinked. She took a sip of her drink like this was completely reasonable. She went on to explain, calmly like she'd given the speech before, that she's had some bad encounters in the past. Never anything that went full horror story, but enough creepy vibes and weird situations that she started bringing a bodyguard friend. Sometimes it was her cousin. Sometimes her roommate. Tonight, it was Micah. I said, "That's different." Trying to be diplomatic, she said, "I mean, would you rather I show up with mace or with backup?" And to be fair, she kind of had a point. Still, having a 6'3" human surveillance camera breathing down our necks did make it a little hard to relax. She didn't seem fazed at all. She jumped straight into deep questions like, "What's the worst thing you've ever done to a friend?" And, "Do you think people are mostly selfish?" I was still recovering from the bodyguard thing and trying not to choke on my soda while she casually interrogated my moral compass. I asked her what she did for work, and she said freelance crisis management, which somehow made everything make even less sense. I don't even fully know what that means, but apparently it involves long emails, sudden flights, and not being allowed to talk about certain clients. She told me she's always on edge, doesn't trust easily, doesn't believe people show their real selves until they're uncomfortable. Said she likes dates where there's a little tension because it cuts through the fake. I said, "Mission accomplished then." She laughed loudly. Micah glanced over. I gave him a little thumbs up. He didn't react. Then she started asking questions about my online presence. If I ever Googled people before meeting them, if I had any red flags for my exes, if I ever lied on a dating profile. I told her the worst lie I ever told was adding 2 inches to my height once when I was 19. She called that typical guy stuff and moved on like she was marking a box on a checklist. The weirdest part was that the date itself wasn't bad. Holly was interesting, smart, confident. She had stories that didn't sound fake, but still made me wonder how she was alive. She told me she once got banned from a resort in Costa Rica for accidentally pulling a fire alarm during a full moon ritual. I didn't ask for details because, honestly, I didn't want them. But the whole time I couldn't ignore the dude at the next table. Every time I said something even remotely personal, I'd glance over and see Micah pretending not to listen, but definitely listening. I felt like I was on a job interview with an audience. Eventually, I asked her, "So, what happens if this goes well? Does he come on the second date too?" She laughed again and said, "Only if I can't read your vibe by then. You're doing all right so far." All right felt like the most loaded compliment I'd ever received. We wrapped up after an hour. She paid for her own drink, gave Micah a nod, and said, "You're not terrible." Then she hugged me, tight, like we were closer than we were, and said, "Text me if you want a second round. No security next time. Probably." They walked off together. I stood there at the curb, trying to process if I'd just been tested, protected, or low-key interrogated. My friend texted me right after and asked how the date went. I replied, "She brought a bodyguard, like actual bodyguard. I think I passed." Holly, full of mystery, mild chaos, and apparently backed up by a dude who could crush a watermelon with his arms. Adam didn't give off sketchy vibes at first, like zero. His profile was very grown up. Pictures in national parks, one of him holding a coffee in front of a bookstore, another of him at some wedding in a vest like he just gave a best man speech about true love. His bio said something corny like communication is everything, and looking for something genuine, which usually makes me roll my eyes, but this time I guess I was in a generous mood. We messaged for about a week. He wasn't flirty in a creepy way. He asked actual questions, responded fast without being clingy, and wrote in full sentences, which is rarer than it should be. He said he'd been out of the dating world for a while and was just getting back into it, but nothing about it felt dramatic. I figured maybe he had a long-term ex or took a break to focus on work or something. We set a dinner date at this cozy ramen place that people always hype up, but I'd never tried. I was looking forward to it. He said he'd been before and gave this whole explanation about which broth was best depending on your mood. I thought that was cute. So I show up, and he's already there at a table, smiling like a golden retriever in a Patagonia jacket. First impression, he looked like someone who goes to therapy, owns more than 2 types of jackets, and knows how to make small talk with your mom if he ever met her. In other words, normal, safe. We ordered food, chatted about random stuff, work, music, weird travel stories. I told him about how I got stranded in an airport once with only peanut and backslash and M's and a neck pillow, and he laughed like he actually found it funny. It was all going great. Easy even. Then an I swear this came out of nowhere. He puts down his chopsticks, leans back in his chair, and says, "So I should probably mention something before this goes any further." Never a good sentence. Literally never. I braced myself. Maybe he had a kid. Maybe he used to be in a cult. Whatever it was, I thought I could handle it. He looks me dead in the eye and goes, "I'm still technically married." The word technically hit harder than the broth spice level. I blinked, thinking maybe I misheard, but nope. He launched right into this whole explanation about how they're emotionally done, how she knows they're not working out, how they've been living in the same place for logistics, but sleeping in separate rooms. He said, "We're in this weird in-between space, like we both know it's over. We just haven't done the paperwork yet." I said, "So, you're still married?" And he nodded like, "Yeah, but not in a real way." Not in a real way. Then he added the part that really sent me. He said they're planning on going to couples therapy eventually. Not to get back together, he clarified, just to talk through the ending in a healthy way. I just sat there like, bro, what? He said they're trying to honor the time they spent together. And during this transition period, they agreed that exploring other connections was okay, as long as they were honest about it. So there I was eating noodles across from a man who was still married, living with his wife, planning therapy with her, and somehow thought that was a perfect moment to re-enter the dating scene. He kept talking, trying to make it sound reasonable, said, "I just think it's healthier to be open about things rather than sneaky." Said he didn't want to wait 6 more months to start meeting people. Why delay a connection that could be great? "Sir, you are literally still splitting utilities with your wife." I asked if she was also dating, and he said, "I don't think so, but she's not against it." I asked if she knew he was on dates already, and he said, "She knows I'm meeting people, yeah." But he said it in that vague way that made me think maybe she didn't know he was halfway through his appetizer with another woman tonight. I tried to stay calm. I wasn't angry, just stunned. because the whole time he kept acting like this was the most grown-up, honest approach anyone could take. He kept using phrases like emotional integrity and conscious uncoupling, like we were in some Gwyneth Paltrow breakup manual. He said he wasn't looking for anything casual either. He was hoping to find someone intentional, someone who could understand nuance. Nuance. That's what he called this situation. Not a mess, not unfinished business, just nuance. I pushed my bowl away and said, "This feels like a lot," and he nodded like he understood. Said, "I get that. A lot of people don't have the emotional bandwidth for it." Right. I'm the one lacking bandwidth. I told him I wasn't sure I wanted to be someone's connection while they were still in marriage limbo. He said, "That's fair. I appreciate the honesty," like he was proud of both of us for being mature while actively blowing my mind with this entire situation. When the bill came, he offered to pay. I let him. Honestly, it felt like a small fee for emotional whiplash. Outside, he gave me this thoughtful look and said, "I think you're really special." I hold across Pat's again. I smiled and said, "I hope you and your wife figure things out." He nodded like I'd said something wise and wandered off into the night like a man who truly thought he had done nothing wrong. I got in an Uber and stared out the window thinking, and I had an episode of some hidden camera show, who just casually drops that they're married and in couples therapy mid-noodle. Not divorced, not separated, just exploring before the therapist gets involved. Tiffany was one of those people who had way too much energy for a nap. Like, every message she sent was 3 paragraphs long, filled with exclamation points, emojis, and side notes in parentheses. You could tell she didn't just copy-paste stuff to people. She was actually putting in effort, asking wild questions like, if your last text was the name of a movie, what genre would it be? I was into it, honestly. She had this big personality vibe, and after a string of dry convos that died after 5 messages, she stood out. We decided to meet for drinks at a chill rooftop bar she liked. Her words were, "It's aesthetic but not pretentious, and the cocktails don't taste like regret." Fair enough. She showed up already mid-story, walking toward me with sunglasses on her head and a tote bag that had "content is everything" printed on the side. I should have taken that as a warning. We ordered drinks, found a table near the edge of the roof, and she kicked things off with, "Okay, I have to ask, what's your worst day ever?" and go. No, "How was your day?" No, "Glad to meet you." Just straight into it like she was hosting a game show. So I told her a short version of a weird date I had with a guy who brought his mom. She laughed way too hard, then started talking about her own dating disasters, but like really detailed. She was describing how one guy had a meltdown over a sushi etiquette, how another tried to surprise her with a dog he borrowed from his neighbor. I noticed she told the stories in this really polished way, like almost rehearsed. Everything had a beginning, middle, and punchline. At one point, I jokingly said, "You should make a podcast or something," and her eyes lit up like I just gave her a puppy. She goes, "So, funny you mentioned that. I actually am." I was like, "Oh wow, cool. What's about?" Thinking it'd be true crime or astrology or dating advice or something harmless. She leaned in, smiled, and said, "It's about bad first dates." I laughed, thought it was funny, until she followed it up with, I might be recording this right now. I stared at her, like straight up blinked and said, "Wait, what?" She pulled out her phone from her tote and pointed to the little mech thing on her shirt. Tiny, barely noticeable. One of those wireless clip-on ones you see in TikToks. I had completely missed it. She said, "Don't worry, it's just audio, and I won't use your name unless you say something truly wild." And even then, I believe stuff. I just sat there stunned. She sipped her drink like this was all totally normal. Said she had a few episodes out already and was building a small audience. People love dating chaos, she said. It makes them feel better about their own love lives. I asked if she got consent before recording people, and she went, "Well, not always at the start. But if the combo's good, I tell them later and let them approve it." I said, "So, you didn't ask me," and she said, "I'm asking now." I didn't know whether to be impressed by the boldness or mildly horrified. She kept talking. Told me about her dream guest list, some dating coach from TikTok, a psychic who reads love energy through voice messages, and an ex who ghosted her that she wants to confront live. She said she's gonna do anonymous call-ins too, where people leave voicemails about their dating fails. The more she talked, the clearer it got that this wasn't just a hobby. She was building something. She had branding ideas, a name, swipe fatigue, and was trying to get it on Spotify by next month. And me. I was probably segment 3 in episode 5. I asked if she ever felt weird turning her actual dates into content, and she shrugged. Honestly, everyone overshares anyway. I just record it. Then she laughed and said, plus, the reactions are always better when people don't know they're being recorded at first. I didn't even know what to say to that. Like, is that supposed to make me feel better? That my confused face and nervous rambling would come off as raw audio. She went back to her drink and started talking about how every date has story potential, and how she once matched with a guy just to ask him if she could use his cringy messages in an episode. I was still sitting there, mentally trying to remember everything I'd said since she walked in, wondering how much of it would end up online. She said she'd change names, distort voices if needed, and that nobody really cares anyway unless they're guilty of something. I said, I do, and she looked surprised, like genuinely shocked that I wouldn't be cool with being secretly recorded for content. She said, wow, you're the first one to actually have an issue with it, which I doubted. After a long pause, she sighed and turned off the mic, said, okay, fine. No podcast tonight. Then she made a joke about how I'd ruined her backup episode, and we just kind of sat there in awkward silence. The rest of the night was meh. The energy was off. I didn't even finish my drink. She scrolled through her phone while I stared at the lights across the street. When the check came, we split it, and she left with it thanks for being a good sport, like I just helped her workshop material for her next hot take. Later that night, she messaged me saying, you had some good lines. Let me know if you ever want to do a real episode. No pressure. I didn't respond. So yeah, that was Tiffany. Future podcast star. Current walking legal gray area. If I ever hear my voice in a random audio clip online saying, I like noodles more than people, I'll know where it came from. I matched with a man on a Sunday night, a kind of night where you've given up on productivity and are just laying in bed swiping while a show plays in the background that you're not really watching. His profile was clean. Photos that looked like they came from the same 3-day trip to Tulum, and a bio that said, into books, clean eating, and honesty. 6-year-old because apparently that matters, which yeah, it kind of does on dating apps. Not gonna lie. He messaged first. Said something normal like, hey, you got great taste in music, which okay, I did have Mitski in my bio, so points for effort. Our convo was fast-paced, funny in that kind of, he's used to being charming way, but not too much. He wasn't love-bombing or weirdly intense, which already made him better than 70% of the dudes in my inbox that week. After 3 days of texting, he asked if I wanted to grab a drink somewhere low-key, and I said yes. He picked this bar that was borderline too trendy. You know the kind. Minimal lighting, chairs that look cool but are terrible to sit in, and a menu that calls fries seasoned potato sticks. He showed up looking like his photos, thankfully. Tall, fitted black shirt, smelled like one of those colognes you don't know the name of but can't stop sniffing. He gave me a hug and said I looked even better in person, which felt a little scripted, but still appreciated. We grabbed drinks and started chatting. Normal first date stuff. Travel, work, family, music, how we both hate small talk but then proceed to do it anyway. He told me he worked in real estate development and that he was working on becoming more intentional with his time, which sounded vague but fine. I told him about my job. He nodded and said, that sounds fulfilling, in a way that made me think he had no idea what I actually did. But whatever, not everyone needs to be locked into career talk on date 1. Then I asked him how long he'd been on the apps and if he'd had any decent dates recently. He said no, that most girls either want to lock it down way too fast or show up already jaded. I kind of laughed and said, well, the apps aren't exactly a playground for emotional stability, which I thought was fair. And then he hit me with it. He said, that's why I decided I only date women under 25. I blinked, thought maybe he was making a dumb joke. I said, wait, seriously? And he nodded, totally deadpan. I just think women over 25 come with too many problems. I stared at him for a second, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. He took a sip of his drink like what he just said was completely logical and not wildly insulting. I asked what he meant, like what kind of problems are we talking here? And he goes, they're too career focused, too set in their ways, a little bitter, honestly. Like, they've already decided men are trash, and they come into dates with an attitude. I genuinely didn't know what to say. I just sat there, sipping my drink, trying to figure out if I was being pranked or if he really believed this garbage. He kept going. He said, younger girls are just more fun, more open-minded. They haven't been burned yet, so they're not defensive. Plus, there's less baggage. Less baggage. This man was 42. Like not 28 trying to date 23-year-olds. I mean a full-grown adult, pushing midlife crisis energy, telling me he's made an active decision to cut off an entire age group of women because they aren't malleable enough for him. And yes, he used that word. I asked, so what happens when they turn 26? Do they just get dumped and replaced with the next one? He smiled like I was being dramatic and said, nah, but that I usually know if it's serious. But honestly, I haven't gotten to that point in a while. Of course not, because dating people 10 to 15 years younger than you isn't a long-term plan. It's a weird little fantasy you get to live in until someone calls you out. He asked how old I was again, and I told him, 27. You should have seen his face. He actually leaned back a bit and said, wow, you carry yourself younger. You don't seem jaded. I wanted to throw my drink at his forehead. Instead, I asked, so what's the oldest you've dated in the last year? And he casually said, 24, I think. She was mature for her age, though. She'd been through a lot. I almost spit my drink out, mature for her age. I couldn't believe how casually he was saying this stuff, like it wasn't completely off. Like we weren't sitting in a bar where literally everyone around us could hear his walking red flags echoing off the concrete walls. I asked him if he ever considered dating someone his own age, and he just shook his head and said, I've tried. It's never worth the effort. At that point, I knew there was no salvaging this. I finished my drink, politely declined when he offered another round, and made up something about needing to check on my dog. I don't have a dog, but it's my go-to escape excuse. He walked me to the door and said, let me know if you want to hang out again. You're cool, not like the others, which is probably what he says to every woman who doesn't storm off mid-date. I smiled, said, I'll think about it, and walked away while texting my friend something like, just went on a date with a man who thinks 25 is the beginning of the end. And then, real estate, real tall, real into women who still say, I don't know what I'm doing with my life because it makes him feel like a mentor. This girl, Jessica, was intense, but like the fun kind of intense. Her profile had the kind of photos that made you feel like she lived inside a Pinterest board. Hiking boots on cliffs, wind in her hair on a beach somewhere, one picture with a falcon, an actual falcon, and a bio that read, if you're boring, don't bother. If you're dramatic, pull up a chair. I was intrigued. We matched after she responded to a meme I posted on my story. She said, this is chaotic. I approve. Her energy was fast-paced right away. Every message was either hilarious or slightly unhinged in the best way. Like she once messaged me, unprompted, if we were on a sinking ship, what role would you play? And when I said, probably the guy yelling at people to get in the lifeboats, she replied, hot. Leadership energy. So yeah, I agreed to the date. We picked this speakeasy-style bar tucked behind a laundromat. I swear, only people who wear rings on every finger know these places exist. She got there after me, walked in like she owned the building, and greeted me with a two-handed handshake and a let's cause some mild destruction. That was the vibe immediately. Wild, flirty, unpredictable. She ordered a drink called the Blackout Poet, which came with a literal feather in it. I stuck with a regular beer because I wasn't trying to drink a mood board. First 20 minutes, great. We talked music, movies, travel. She had stories for everything. She once got kicked out of a museum for getting too passionate during a debate about Impressionism. She backpacked alone through South America to get away from noise. And yeah, she dropped those lines like she knew they'd land. But then, and I don't even know how we got here, she started talking about her ex. Not unusual. Exes come up. But she wasn't complaining or venting. She was kind of fascinated. She said, "So my last boyfriend disappeared." I laughed because I thought she meant like emotionally or ghosted her. That's normal. She shook her head and said, "No, I mean literally disappeared. Like one day he was just gone." Now I'm sitting there, suddenly way more sober. I asked what she meant exactly, and she just shrugged and took another sip of her feather cocktail. He left for a weekend trip, never came back, deleted all his social media, quit his job. No one's heard from him since. It's been 8 months. I waited for her to say something else, something that would explain it, but she just looked at me and said, "Weird, right?" and then smiled like she just told me her favorite ice cream flavor. I asked if she reported it or anything, and she said his family did, but nothing came of it. She said the police asked a few questions, then gave up. I asked how she felt about it, and she just tilted her head and said, "I mean, it's kind of a power move." A power move. She started laughing and said, "Don't worry, I didn't kill him or anything," then winked. And listen, I know a lot of people say "don't worry" when they're trying to be funny, but something about the way she said it and the way she winked made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I asked if they ended on bad terms, and she said, "Sort of. He was boring. I think he knew I needed more, so maybe he did it for me." She said it like she was talking about someone who ghosted her after 3 dates, not someone who went full vanish from the grid like a Jason Bourne reboot. She had no sadness in her voice, no confusion, just this weird admiration, like he did something romantic by deleting himself from society. Then she changed the subject completely and started asking if I had any allergies or if I was the type to leave a toothbrush at someone's place too soon. And I'm still sitting there thinking, did she really just say her last boyfriend disappeared and then followed up with a joke about murder? From that point on, I couldn't focus. She was still talking, still animated and laughing, but my brain was stuck in a loop. Like, what if she actually knows something about where this guy went? What if she's the reason? What if that wink wasn't a joke, but some sort of secret code? And the thing is, there wasn't any actual evidence of anything. She didn't seem dangerous. She didn't say anything explicitly threatening, but that's the part that messed with me. It was all just subtle enough to make me question whether I was being paranoid or just cautious. When the bill came, she insisted on paying, said she always covers the first round in case there's no second. Then she asked if I wanted to go to this after-hours art show she knew about, said there'd be fire twirlers and weird vibes. Normally, I'd be down, but not after the possible murder flex. I said I had an early morning, which was a lie. She nodded, not offended at all, and said, "Cool, you're fun. Hit me up before you disappear," then winked again. I walked home fast, like faster than normal. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was definitely more alert than I've ever been after a date. That night, I found myself Googling her name just out of curiosity. Found a few socials, nothing weird, but there was a Reddit thread for a while back about people who disappeared from relationships. No names, but one of the stories sounded a little too familiar. Anyway, I never texted her again. She never followed up either. Okay, Ben was the kind of match that makes you think, okay, finally, someone normal. His photos were chill. One at a barbecue with friends, one in a hoodie on a hike, one where he was holding a dog that wasn't his, but I pretended to believe it anyway. His bio said something like, "Trying to meet someone who doesn't ghost and actually likes breakfast." Simple, direct, no red flags. He messaged me first, something basic but not dry. "Okay, I got a hot take on cereal, but only if you promise not to block me." I was curious. We started talking, and honestly, he was kind of great. Not too intense, didn't overshare, actually laughed at my dumb jokes. We texted for about a week before he asked if I wanted to grab dinner. Casual spot, burgers and beer kind of place. It all felt very let's take it easy, which I was fine with. I show up, and he's already there, sitting outside, wearing a denim jacket and looking more nervous than I expected. He stood up when I walked over, which was cute, and said something like, "I'm glad you didn't catfish me," which was also kind of dumb, but I let it slide. We ordered food, got drinks, and honestly, it started off well. He was charming in that slightly awkward but trying really hard to be present way. I liked it. 20 minutes in, we're talking about music, and he casually mentions a playlist he made for his ex. I was like, oh, cool, thinking that was the end of it. It wasn't. He keeps talking about her. Not in a bitter or dramatic way, but just a lot. Like she kept coming up in every story. Me and my ex used to go there. She hated this kind of beer. She introduced me to this band. I tried to steer the conversation in different directions, but every road led back to her. Eventually, I said something like, sounds like it was a long relationship. And he goes, yeah, just ended a couple weeks ago. A couple weeks. I blinked. Wait, like recently. He nodded, totally casual. Yeah, like 18 days ago. 18. Then he says, I wasn't going to mention it this soon, but yeah, she dumped me. I didn't see it coming. Honestly, I'm still kind of wrecked. I paused mid-fray, trying to decide if I was supposed to comfort him or slowly back away from the emotional fire. He kept going. I figured the best way to get over someone is to just date someone else, you know. I gave a half-hearted aha while trying to figure out if I was part of a breakup strategy or if this man just had no concept of timing. Then, and I swear this happened, he says, I actually told her I had a date tonight. I blinked again. You told your ex. He nods. Yeah, I figured it might make her realize she made a mistake. I just stared at him. He was sipping his beer like what he said was completely logical, like telling your ex you're going on a date with someone else. And using that date, me, as emotional bait, was just a normal Thursday night plan. And then he says she might actually show up. I told her where we were in case she wanted to talk. What? I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He pulled out his phone and said, she left me on read, but sometimes she shows up anyway. She's unpredictable like that. I looked around the patio like she might already be here, hiding behind a potted plant and waiting to spring out with receipts. I couldn't even focus on the food anymore. My brain was just replaying his words on loop. I said, so, you're using this date to make your ex jealous. And he goes, not using. It's like dual purpose. I also wanted to meet you. You're cool. Cool, I'm cool. And also apparently bait in some emotionally chaotic triangle. I didn't know whether to feel insulted or weirdly flattered. He said, I knew you'd understand, which made it even worse. Like I was supposed to be chill with being an unknowing prop in his relationship drama. Then, like he was offering a peace treaty, he said, she might not come, but if she does, just act natural. It'll make it more real. I sat back, blinked at him again, and said, I think I'm done eating. He looked disappointed, like I was the one ruining the vibe. Then he asked if I still wanted to grab a drink somewhere after. Just the two of us. Just the two of us. After telling his ex where we were. After using me as bait. After possibly inviting a scene to unfold in front of the restaurant. I said no, politely. And I got up and asked the waiter for a box and the check. Ben didn't fight it. He just shrugged and said, honestly, I get it. You're probably too mature for this anyway. No kidding. I walked out half laughing, half waiting to be tackled by some girl in a hoodie screaming, you can keep him. But no one showed up. At least not while I was there. Sweet face, broken heart, and absolutely no awareness that people aren't emotional weapons. Olivia had one of those profiles that makes you scroll through it twice just to make sure it's real. She had dimples, thick curly hair, and this photo where she's wearing a big hoodie and holding a cup of something that looked aggressively pumpkin spiced. Her bio said, looking for something fun, but also willing to fake a relationship for a good cause. I thought that part was a joke. I thought the whole fake relationship line was sarcasm. Spoiler, it wasn't. We'd matched on a Wednesday. She had major golden retriever energy in the chat. Fast replies, lots of haha and on. And she used caps, but only for funny emphasis, not in an annoying way. She asked if I wanted to get ice cream instead of drinks because alcohol dates are weird and messy and I trust people more when I see their ice cream order. Which, honestly, solid logic. We met at this little place that looked like a pastel explosion. Mint walls, fake plants, benches that creaked too loud. She was already there when I arrived, wearing sneakers and a pink jacket, and she waved at me like we were long-lost friends. The vibe was cute immediately. She ordered lavender honey ice cream and judged me hard for getting cookies and cream, but in a playful way. We sat outside on this weird metal bench and started talking. Normal stuff at first. What we do for work, family drama, dumb things we believed as kids. She told me about how she thought clouds were solid until she was like 9. And I said I used to think the moon followed my car, and we both laughed like idiots. Then, and I swear this was out of nowhere, she asked, "How do you feel about fake dating?" I laughed again, assuming it was a joke. I said, "Like pretending we're a couple to avoid talking to annoying people at parties." She shook her head. "No, like fake dating for real, publicly, for revenge." I stopped chewing and blinked at her. She grinned and said, "Okay, hear me out." Apparently, she used to be really involved in her church, like not just going on Sundays. This girl was running youth events, helping plan fundraisers, leading study groups. She said it used to be a big part of her life until she came out as bisexual. And instead of, I don't know, acting like decent humans, they basically exiled her. Like full on, you're a bad influence on the other girls kind of thing. They told her she couldn't serve in any leadership role anymore and said she'd be welcome at events as long as she kept things discreet. Her exact words were, "They wanted me to disappear without saying I disappeared." So she left. Quietly. Didn't fight it. Just dipped. But now, months later, she'd been invited to this huge church retreat thing, probably by accident or out of guilt, and she wanted to go. But not alone. She wanted to show up with a boyfriend, a very obviously supportive, affectionate boyfriend. Someone to pose for pictures with, hold hands with, and make her look like she moved on, thriving in her messy queer joy, as she put it. She wanted it to be just enough of a statement to make the judgmental people uncomfortable, but not so over the top that she'd get kicked out again. So, yeah, she was asking if I'd fake date her, just for the weekend. I thought she was messing with me, but no, she had a whole plan. She even pulled out a little list from her bag with details. Where we'd stay, what outfits she already pre-approved, which people to avoid, and which ones to be extra affectionate in front of. I scanned the list, still waiting for her to laugh and say it was a joke. She didn't. She just said, "You'd be so good at it. You got the face for church moms to trust you." I didn't know if that was a compliment or not. I asked, why not ask a friend to do it? And she said she tried. Most of her friends were either too scared to be seen there or already blacklisted. "I need someone with no history," she said. Someone new. Someone believable. She told me it was only 2 days. She'd cover gas, food, even let me pick the music on the drive. I asked what I'd have to do, and she said, "Nothing dramatic. Just look like you're really into me. Put your arm around me. Say cute things. Maybe play with my hair if we're sitting down." I just sat there, holding my melting ice cream like I'd wandered into someone else's side quest. And honestly, I didn't hate the idea. Not because I had a weird savior complex or anything, but because she was so confident and chaotic about it, like she'd already decided it would work and just needed a willing co-star. But then she added, "Oh, and if we accidentally kiss, I don't think anyone would complain," with this very specific eyebrow raise that made it 1000% more confusing. I laughed and said, "You've done this before, haven't you?" And she said, "Not with a guy. You'd be my divot hetero distraction." That was the exact sentence. I didn't give her a yes or no right then. She said it was cool, no pressure. You can think about it. I won't be mad if you say no, but I will find someone else and make them wear matching denim. We finished our ice cream and went for a short walk afterward. Honestly, the whole thing stayed in my head for days. I kept thinking about it. Not just because it was so weirdly specific, but because she was so calm about it, like revenge could be both petty and poetic. I never did go with her to the church retreat. I said no in the nicest way I could. She didn't seem upset. She just texted, "All good. I found someone with better hair anyway."